You think you know the story of Cinderella. You see the cinders, the pumpkin, the little mice in their adorable outfits. You see a girl, kind and patient, whose suffering is magically erased by a fairy godmother, a glass slipper, and the love of a handsome prince. It's a story of hope, a story that tells you if you are good and beautiful and wait long enough, you will be rescued. That story is a lie. It's a beautiful, sparkling, carefully constructed lie, polished over centuries to be palatable for children, to be profitable for movie studios. But beneath the shimmering surface lies the original artifact. And that artifact is not a fairy tale. It's a weapon. It is a coded message, a story of staggering brutality, social rebellion, and ritualistic abuse that has been deliberately censored for 300 years. Once you understand that the famous slipper was never made of glass, you begin to see the first crack in the fantasy. Once you realize the fairy godmother was originally the vengeful, reanimated spirit of a murdered woman, you see the story for what it is. And once you learn about the 900-year-old Chinese manuscript that contains the tale's oldest bones, you will understand a truth so horrific it was systematically erased. The story of Cinderella is not about finding a prince. It's a story about the lengths women have gone to survive in a world designed to break them, and it is drenched in blood. Let us begin with the most famous object in the history of folklore, the glass slipper. It is the linchpin of the entire modern narrative. It is unique, magical, and fragile. It fits only one person in the entire kingdom, a perfect crystalline symbol of Cinderella's special nature, except it was never glass. The man you have to thank, or perhaps blame for this deception, is Charles Perrault. Picture him. It is the late 17th century in the glittering, decadent court of King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Perrault is a man of letters, a member of the prestigious Académie Française, writing for an audience of aristocrats in powdered wigs who valued wit and elegance above all else. His 1697 collection, Histoire ou Contes du Temps Passé, or Tales of Mother Goose, was designed to entertain these salon-goers. In his native French, Perrault describes Cinderella's shoe as a pantoufle de verre, glass. But folklorists and linguists have long pointed to a tantalizing, almost certain probability. In the French of the time, the word for glass, verre, was pronounced almost identically to the word verre. What is verre? Verre is fur. Specifically, the grey and white winter pelt of the red squirrel, meticulously stitched together in a checkered pattern. And in the world Perrault inhabited, this was not just any fur, it was a symbol of immense power. You have to understand the context here. 17th century Europe was bound by a rigid system of sumptuary laws. These were laws that dictated, with the force of imprisonment or fine, who could wear what. They were a legal cage built around the class system. Certain fabrics, like silk or velvet, certain colours, like purple, and certain furs were legally restricted to the nobility. They were visual markers of your station, a way to instantly identify who belonged and who did not. And verre was one of the most exclusive. To wear a slipper of verre was to wear a signifier of royalty or high nobility. Now, look at the story again. When Cinderella arrives at the ball in a slipper made not of magical, fragile glass, but of incredibly expensive, legally restricted noble fur, she is not just a beautiful mystery girl. She is a revolutionary. She is committing a crime of social aspiration. She is wearing an identity that is not hers by birth, a direct challenge to the established order of the kingdom. The slipper is no longer a fairy tale prop. It is an act of sartorial treason. The test of the slipper, then, is not about finding the one girl with a perfectly shaped foot. It is about finding the one audacious commoner who dared to masquerade as a noble. The prince is not searching for a soulmate. He is hunting down a social insurgent. This single mistranslation, or perhaps deliberate poetic change by Perrault, defanged the entire story, turning a tale of class warfare into a simple romance. He took a story about social climbing and laundered it for the very aristocrats it was meant to critique. But Perrault's version is a relatively recent innovation. To find the story's darker heart, we must travel further back, before the Sun King's court, to the smoky hearths of 17th century Italy. Here, in 1634, a writer named Giambattista Basile published a collection called Lo Conto degli Conti, The Tale of Tales, and in it we find the story of Zezolla. Zezolla is one of our earliest recorded Cinderellas, and her story is a horror show. There is no bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. There is no sweet, bumbling fairy godmother. Instead, there is a tree. In Basile's telling, Zezolla is encouraged by her governess to murder her first cruel stepmother. She does this by telling her stepmother to look for something in a large wooden chest and then slamming the heavy lid down on her neck, breaking it. After the deed is done, the governess marries Zezolla's father, becoming her new stepmother, and soon reveals herself to be even more monstrous than the first, bringing her own 6 daughters into the house to torment Zezolla. This is not a passive victim. This is a girl who becomes a killer to escape one prison, only to find herself in another, far worse. Desperate, Zezolla relies on a gift her father brought her from the island of Sardinia, a magical date tree. She cultivates this tree, and it becomes her link to the magical world. When she needs help, she speaks her wishes to the tree. It is the tree that provides her with the finery to attend the royal feast. This is no mere plot device. This is a powerful echo of something far older, something pre-Christian. Folklorists like Maria Tatar have pointed out that in many of the story's ancient variants, the magical helper is not an external agent, but a direct link to the protagonist's dead biological mother. The mother's spirit is embodied in the natural world, a tree that grows on her grave, a cow that speaks with her voice, a bird that nests in the branches above her tomb. Imagine a world steeped in ancestor worship, a world where the dead are not gone, but are a potent force, their love and protection accessible to those who know how to ask. The fairy godmother is a Christianized, sanitized replacement for a pagan earth deity. She is the domesticated ghost of the murdered mother. The original story is about a daughter drawing power from her maternal bloodline, a primal, chthonic force that the evil stepmother, the usurper, is trying to sever. The conflict is not between good and evil. It is a war between 2 matriarchal lines, one legitimate and rooted in the earth, the other illegitimate and invasive. Perrault stripped this pagan power away, replacing the terrifying, nurturing spirit of the dead mother with a fluffy, non-threatening caricature. He made the magic external, a gift from a stranger, rather than an inheritance drawn from the grave. He severed the story from its dark, powerful roots. But even Basile's grim tale was not the version that would codify the story's brutality in the modern imagination. For that, we must travel north, to early 19th century Germany, and to 2 brothers obsessed with the soul of their nation, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. The Brothers Grimm were not storytellers. They were academics, philologists. They travelled the German countryside, not to invent tales for children, but to collect and record the oral folklore of the Volk, the common people, believing these stories held the key to a pure, unified German identity. Their 1812 collection, Kinder- und Hausmärchen, Children's and Household Tales, was a work of cultural preservation, and their Cinderella, Aschenputtel, is utterly merciless. In Aschenputtel, the connection to the dead mother is explicit. Before she dies, her mother tells her, "Dear child, remain pious and good." then God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you. Aschenputtel plants a hazel twig on her mother's grave, and her tears water it until it grows into a beautiful tree. 3 times a day she goes to the grave to weep and pray, and a little white bird, the mother's spirit, nests in the tree, throwing down whatever she wishes for. This is where the story takes its famously violent turn. When the prince arrives with the slipper, here, made of gold, not glass or fur, the first stepsister takes it to her room to try it on. Her toe is too big. Her mother, the stepmother, stands beside her, holding a knife. "Cut off your toe," she says. "When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." And she does it. The girl hacks off her own toe, forces her bloody foot into the shoe, and the prince, none the wiser, lifts her onto his horse to ride away. But as they pass the hazel tree on her mother's grave, 2 little doves, sent by the spirit, coo out, "Rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too small, the true bride is not this one at all." The prince looks down. He sees the blood streaming out. He returns the false bride in disgust. Then the second sister tries. Her heel is too big. And again, the mother hands her the knife. "Cut off a piece of your heel," she commands. "When you are queen, you will no longer have to go on foot." The girl mutilates her own foot, squeezes it into the golden slipper, and fools the prince. And again, as they pass the grave, the doves expose her. This is the detail that the sanitized versions cannot tolerate. This is the gut punch revelation. The evil of the stepsisters is not just vanity or cruelty. It is ambition so profound, so desperate, that they are willing to carve up their own bodies to achieve it. It is a horrifyingly visceral commentary on the prison of womanhood in a world where marriage was the only path to power, the only escape from destitution. Their self-mutilation is a physical manifestation of the way the system forced women to contort themselves, to cut away pieces of their own being, to fit an impossibly small ideal. The Grimms, even in their academic pursuit, were agents of change. Later editions of their collection were gradually softened, re-edited, to be more suitable for a burgeoning children's market. The raw, terrifying honesty of the oral tradition was sanded down for bourgeois sensibilities, but the final act of sanitization, the one that would conquer the globe, came from an animation studio in California. Walt Disney's 1950 film took the softest version, Perrault's courtly romance, and stripped it of any remaining ambiguity or threat. Cinderella's defining characteristic is not the cunning of Zozola, nor the grim piety of Aschenputtel. It is a passive, gentle dreaminess. She does not kill. She does not draw power from her mother's grave. She does not even seem particularly angry. She just wishes upon a star. Her salvation comes entirely from outside forces, a fairy godmother who shows up unbidden, and a prince who does all the work of finding her. The motive for this sanitization was commercial. Disney was building a brand, an empire, based on a specific, marketable version of aspirational womanhood. The ideal Disney princess was beautiful, kind, patient, and ultimately powerless until a man validated her existence. The story was transformed from a complex, often brutal, female-centric narrative of survival and revenge into a simple romance plot. The biological mother, the central figure in the older tales, is reduced to a hazy, forgotten memory. The stepsisters are punished not with blinding and mutilation, but with simple social failure. The entire dark, bloody, complicated history of the tale was erased in favour of a narrative that reinforced a deeply conservative patriarchal ideal. But the history is far deeper and far stranger than even the Grimm's bloody account. To find the story's true origin, we must leave Europe entirely. We must travel back 1,000 years to Tang Dynasty China. In a book from around 860 AD, a scholar named Duan Chengxi recorded a story. He heard from a family servant. It is the story of a girl named Ye Shen, and it is unmistakably Cinderella. Ye Shen is an orphan, raised by a cruel stepmother. Her only friend is a beautiful fish with golden eyes, which she secretly raises in a pond. The stepmother discovers the fish, kills it, cooks it, and buries the bones under a dung heap. Ye Shen is devastated, but the spirit of the fish speaks to her, telling her to retrieve the bones, for they are magical. Whenever she needs something, she must pray to the bones. Here we see it again, the murdered magical helper, a stand-in for the lost parent whose remains hold a protective power. Using the bones magic, Ye Shen attends a local festival, wearing a magnificent cloak of kingfisher feathers and a pair of tiny golden slippers. She loses one of these slippers as she flees. The slipper is found by a warlord who becomes obsessed with finding its owner. He builds a pavilion and places the slipper on display, and every woman in the kingdom comes to try it on. But the slipper is impossibly small. This is the final, most disturbing piece of the puzzle. Why this obsession with a tiny foot? Why is this the central test in a story that has spanned continents and millennia? Because in 9th century China, an impossibly small foot was not a mark of delicate beauty. It was a mark of aristocratic, ritualized torture. This is the origin of foot binding. The practice, which would become widespread in subsequent centuries, involved breaking the arch and toes of a young girl's feet, sometimes as young as 4 or 5, and binding them tightly with long strips of cloth. The goal was to stunt their growth, to fold the foot back on itself, creating what was known as a golden lotus, a foot only 3 to 4 inches long. It was excruciatingly painful. It often led to lifelong disability, infection, and flesh rotting away, and it was a symbol of extreme wealth and status. A woman with bound feet was a living trophy. It proved her family was so rich she would never need to work or even walk unassisted. It was a brutal method of enforcing female chastity and obedience, rendering women physically dependent on their families and husbands. It was a system of control, of patriarchal ownership, written onto the female body in the language of broken bone and crushed flesh. Ye Shen's tiny golden slipper is not a fairy tale fantasy. It is a direct reference to a real-world instrument of systemic abuse. The prince, or warlord, is not searching for love. He is searching for a high-status woman, one who has been suitably crippled according to the aesthetic and social demands of her class. The story, in its oldest form, is not about magic. It is about a system of female mutilation so ingrained, so normalized, that it became the central feature of a romantic quest. So let's connect the dots. The story we call Cinderella is not one story. It is a composite fossil bearing the imprints of 1,000 years of human history. It carries the memory of pagan, ancestor-worshipping cultures, where a daughter's power came from the spirit of her dead mother. It carries the coded language of class warfare from feudal Europe, where wearing the wrong kind of fur could get you arrested. It carries the psychological trauma of a patriarchal system where women were driven to self-harm in a desperate bid for social advancement. And it carries the ghost of its oldest known ancestor, a testament to a culture that systematically broke the bodies of its women in the name of beauty and status. This is why the story was encoded. These truths were too dangerous, too painful to be spoken aloud. They were the lived realities of powerless people. So they hid their protest, their grief, and their rage in a story told by the fire, passed from mother to daughter, a secret history disguised as fantasy. The sanitizers, Perrault, the later Grimms, and most powerfully, Disney, did not just make the story for children. They performed a cultural lobotomy. They cut out the rage, the pain, the rebellion, and the historical truth. They replaced a narrative of female survival and brutal justice with a passive fantasy of romantic rescue. They sold us a story about a girl who needed a prince, when the original was about a girl who, with the help of her murdered mother's ghost, brought an entire system to its knees. Cinderella is not a bedtime story. It is a crime scene, preserved in narrative amber. It documents the real-world prisons that have been built for women for over a millennium. The prison of class, the prison of the home, the prison of impossible beauty standards, and the literal, agonizing prison of a mutilated body. The story endures, not because we dream of a glass slipper, but because on a deep, archetypal level, we recognize the injustice. We understand the usurper, the cruel hierarchy, the feeling of being an outcast in your own life. The sanitized versions are popular, but the story's ancient, dark heart is what gives it its immortal power. The Disney version ends with a wedding and a vague, happily ever after. The Grimm version ends very differently. On Cinderella's wedding day, the two stepsisters attend, hoping to curry favour with the new queen. As they walk down the aisle, Cinderella's spirit doves fly down from the hazel tree. They peck out one eye from each sister, and on the way out of the church, they fly down again and peck out the other. They are left blinded, condemned to live the rest of their lives as beggars. The story is not about forgiveness, it is about retribution. In the world that forged this tale, justice was not a gentle thing. It was Old Testament. It was blood for blood and eye for an eye. Cinderella is not the story of a girl who was rescued by a prince. It is the story of a girl who, with the power of the dead at her back, took back everything that was stolen from her and left her enemies broken, blind, and begging in the dirt.